Hi, everybody. This is David Nevins for Citybiz List. Welcome to our program today. And today we continue with our series on behalf of the Bridge Alliance, which is entitled Repairing America's Broken Democracy. So I think we're all in favor of that. And hopefully today we'll learn something toward that end that will help us get there. So our guest today is Emma Petty Addams. Emma is the executive director of Mormon Women for Ethical Government. Emma, welcome to our program. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much for hosting me.
So Emma, your title, executive director of an organization called Mormon Women for Ethical Government. An interesting title, obviously, and one that I think many of our viewers might not be familiar with. So I guess two questions to start. Tell us a little bit about yourself. And then if you don't mind, segue right into tell us a little bit about the organization that you now head.
Great. Thank you so much. So I am the executive director of what we term MWEG. That is our acronym, which is a little bit less of a mouthful to say than the full name. So I have been executive director for a little over 2 years. My background is a bit eclectic, but one that has prepared me in surprising ways for this current role. I am actually trained. Most of my life as a musician. I trained as a classical pianist. Then in addition, in college, I also studied history, Eastern European history, communist and post-communist literatures, if you want to get into the weeds. So that was something that was my passion early in life. And I needed to pay off student loans. And so I chose to spend a few years working in law firms and in Silicon Valley. And I did contract negotiations and investor relations and a few other assorted things before returning to spend a good decade and a half, mostly in a private piano studio, teaching piano, raising boys. I have 3 sons, and recently kind of returned to the performing stage before I felt the call to do what I'm doing right now. And in many ways, as the executive director of a large organization with thousands of women and a huge leadership and volunteer team, so many of the skills and experience that I had as a musician, conducting an orchestra, navigating different personalities and ideas, learning how to focus and to be, probably the most important thing is the ability to stay calm and patient in the midst of sometimes chaotic circumstances has led me here to this role. And then our organization is a membership organization. We have over 7,000 women, mostly in the United States, but we have a few expats as well as others around the country, around the world, And we focus on inspiring women of faith to be ambassadors of peace who transcend partisanship and courageously advocate for ethical government. So we have kind of, I guess, a dual focus. One is to train women to be advocates, to be actors in the public sphere who have integrity and courage. And then as an organization, we seek to advocate for those issues that we choose that fit within our mission vision and try to make a difference collectively.
Advocating for ethical government and change in government is a good thing. The devil's in the details, I suppose, right? So now it's my understanding your organization has, again, correct me if I'm wrong, 6 principles. I think you call them 6 principles of peacemaking. So give us some detail on that. And, let's get into the weeds a little bit in terms of how MWEG, as you called it, how you guys do what you do.
So we do have a lot of principles. That's one thing we are not lacking. We have a very strong foundational set of principles. We have those principles of peacemaking. We have principles of nonpartisanship. We have principles of ethical government, which define so that anyone who chooses to associate with us kind of knows what they're getting into. We try to be very transparent about both what we are and how we do our work. So those 6 principles of peacemaking that you mentioned have been with us from the very beginning. we have kind of an interesting founding story, and that there was a group of friends and colleagues who had a Facebook group and were discussing politics, and were just kind of feeling like, what can we do? And so they decided to start a little something. And that something, within a month, actually within a week, it had 1,000 people. And then within a month, it had 4,000. And then we kind of put the brakes on it to figure out a few more things before we continued from there. But from the very beginning, these principles of how we all were to interact with each other in a space where there was women with great diversity of thought, ideology across the political spectrum, different personal experiences. These 6 principles draw heavily from the 6 principles of nonviolence from Martin Luther King Jr. So our founders spent a great deal of time studying his work. Letter from Birmingham Jail has a major influence on our organization, as well as those 6 principles. And so, throughout the centuries, many different groups, people, organizations, movements have drawn from the philosophical foundations of Gandhi and Hegel, and certainly Martin Luther King Jr. really took those and brought them into the forefront here of American life. And so in some ways you can look at our 6 principles of peacemaking as kind of a Latter-day Saint interpretation of those, that we seek to be proactive and courageous, that we always try to unify rather than divide. We have great tolerance for people, but none for injustice. And that's really been a key one from the very beginning when you're navigating, political waters that are very tumultuous, is to always discuss and criticize principles or actions rather than people. We view human suffering as sacred. We could spend the entire hour on exactly what that means, because that's quite an in-depth conversation. Choose love instead of hate, and that ultimate peace is not only possible, but sure. And so those principles form the foundation of how we interact with each other. And then in addition, how we interact as individuals going out into the political sphere, and how our organization interacts with political actors, with everyone outside of our spaces.
I would say not too many people would disagree. And yet, it seems to me at the same time, those are principles, many of which are sadly lacking in our government today, and certainly in the world of politics and elections and the like. So give us just a taste, if you would. I mean, having recruited many thousands of women to support this cause is no small feat. Give us just a taste of what you all are doing to, move these principles forward, to try to impact ethical government, and, just some details, if you don't mind.
Sure. So, as I said, the principles are definitely lofty, right? As you say, they are certainly aspirational. And so what we've done is then broken them down into a series, what we call practical peacemaking. So we have a professional mediator who's amongst us. You can pretty much find any field in that is needed in this. We have a Latter-day Saint woman who's at the top of her field in it. So here we have a mediator, and she has spent time breaking down the act of how to negotiate, how to persuade, how to manage conflict. We have our women go through and kind of analyze what is their own conflict style, and what are the different ways that one can manage it. So someone might find, I'm an avoider, or I'm an accommodator, or I'm a competitor. And so kind of knowing who they are, and then using that and practicing that in their relationships and their conversations with friends and family, but then in addition, in their conversations with elected officials. So by way of example, I was on a call with a senator's office a couple months ago, and we kind of presented what we were working on. In this case, it was voting rights. And the staffer had a kind of a strong reaction, kind of a very partisan strong reaction to what we were saying. And even though we kind of represented across the political spectrum, we were united around wanting voting rights wanting more access to voting. And he kind of gave us a little bit of a lecture, and it wasn't unkind, but it was, I think, a bit, it was very partisan. And so then you could kind of tell he kind of sat back and waited for us to punch back, and kind of took a deep breath, thought about it, and, spoke to him in a way that, respected his opinion, expressed great disagreement and why, but did not come with our dukes up ready to fight. And he actually apologized after what we said. And he said, I really appreciate that response because, he could tell that we weren't there to push, a partisan agendas per se, but there were principles that we were seeking to advocate for and push forward. And we weren't there to feel like we were right or that we were better or that we were going to win the conversation, but we genuinely were concerned with access to voting. So that's kind of an example of in the weeds. Hopefully that gives you what you're asking for there.
Your example also, shares some of the obvious, which is that we have such, political polarization today. It's interesting, none of us, I don't think too many of us, are first to define ourselves as, tell me about yourself. Oh, I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican. Generally, that doesn't. I don't know how often that comes up on the first date, so to speak. It seems like there are other things that are more important, and yet in our government and politics today, it's that polarization and label making that so divides us. Emma, I know you're involved in a couple of new projects, I believe. So share with us a little bit about what you're working on.
So we recently released our strategic plan for the next year and beyond. And as you can imagine, ethical government's kind of a large mission. A lot of organizations might be narrowly focused on one or two issues. And we define ethical government, very thoughtfully in a set of principles, which we are now going through and creating, more extensive background for. So for example, one of our principles is that, let's see, let me read you a good one that I think we're working on right now. Political structures and electoral systems should be designed to maximize participation of and provide equitable access to all citizens in a society. And then each of these sub-principles we've attached back to scripture, whether it be from the Book of Mormon or from the New Testament or Old Testament. And so we're going through each of those sub-principles. We have 3 main principles, and each of them has about 8 to 9 sub-principles. And we're writing kind of deep background on what that looks like, kind of practically but philosophically. So pulling from examples of activists and great thinkers of the past and the present. And so those we're kind of releasing one by one as we go through them. And they're worked on by a group of women who come from across the political spectrum and then reviewed by experts in the field to make sure before we put them out, we feel really good about those. So that's one kind of behind the scenes project that I think people don't know about until then they need it. And there it is. We have advocacy that we are focused on as well. We have 5 advocacy areas that we have decided to give our time and energy to over the next 1 to 2 years, one of them being immigration and refugees. So currently our women are engaged in petitioning government to make sure that there's avenues for those fleeing Afghanistan to be able to come to the U.S. And then in addition, we are asking all of our women to reach out locally to their local refugee resettlement agencies and be hands on the ground or feet on the ground for when those refugees come to our communities. So that is kind of one of the things we're doing. We also will continue to advocate for immigration reform, which is a complex topic as well. We try to kind of make sure our advocacy is both kind of national, but then close to the state and local level. So we're doing a bunch of work around environmental advocacy. We have a project called Caring for Creation. We've been focusing a lot in the states of Arizona and Nevada, where we have a lot of members trying to get the ACC in Arizona to pass clean energy rules, focusing on some work in Nevada, but then in addition in Utah and nationally asking our women to express why it is they care for the earth in a way that is compelling to their elected representatives. We are focusing pretty hyper locally in Utah on the issue of equitable education. There's been a bit of a flurry of activity in local school boards and state school boards, as well as state legislatures around kind of defining how it is that our children talk and learn about equity, about racism. And so we are working with a coalition of teachers and educators and researchers and community members in the state of Utah to be a part of that conversation and to guide our legislature as they seek to, try to try to help tamp down some of that extreme polarization and partisanship around that issue, which I'm sure you can imagine is quite a feat and really requires our principles of peacemaking.
No question about it. I hardly know what to say besides, good for you. Keep at it. But as our time is expiring, Emma, I think you have some upcoming events or initiatives that you might want to make our viewers aware of.
Well, I think we are, the advocacy things that I talked about are certainly, we have ongoing efforts always. So if you follow us on social media, we have kind of a constant stream. Certainly one of the big focuses that I alluded to earlier is voting. We see that as the foundation of everything that we do is expanding access to the vote. So we'll always work on that. So this past weekend in Utah, our Utah chapter lead spoke in a march on voting on the anniversary of the March on Washington. And so we are going to be advocating very strongly for HR 4, the John Lewis Rights Voting Advancement Act. So we will be putting out educational information. Whenever we do a call to action, we always try to provide a foundation of understanding for those who are advocating. So it's not just do what we say, but understand why this is important. So you can watch for that, as well as we have ongoing events all the time, sometimes open to the public, sometimes open to our members, but we invite any woman who chooses who would like to become a member to join us and can attend those events.
So speaking of social media and otherwise, how does one learn more about MWEG, or the Mormon Women for Ethical Government organization?
So we certainly have a website. You can find it at mweg.org. So that's a good place to have access to our stuff. Those who are interested in diving in deeper and learning more, we welcome any woman to join us as a member who either is a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or we have many members who are just comfortable associating with us and are okay that we talk openly about faith and that it's part of the conversation. And they're some of our favorite members. And then in addition, certainly on social media, we have a very active Instagram account. That's definitely one where we have lots of interviews there and live. So invite you to follow us there. On Twitter, certainly, and on Facebook. Those are all our main places where we are functioning right now.
Well, that's really wonderful, Emma. I've enjoyed the few minutes we've had together. My only disappointment, honestly, is that you're sitting in your office. It's not every day that I have a conversation with a Stanford-trained pianist. So unless the piano is right in front of you, where I might ask for you to play us something, we'll have to reserve that, I guess, for the next time.
That sounds good. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you about our work, and grateful for your questions.
Oh, thank you so much, Emma. And again, to our viewers, our guest has been Emma Petty Addams. She serves as Executive Director of the Mormon Women for Ethical Government. And this is a program that is airing, of course, on Citybiz List, sponsored by the Bridge Alliance. And this is all about a continuing series, Fixing America's Broken Democracy. Thank you so much, Emma, for being with us, and thank you for watching. This is David Nevins for Citybiz List.